Today we're going to be learning Ketubot, Daf Kafchet, and we will finish the second chapter. Okay, our Daf starts with kind of relevant Mishnah that we saw from yesterday, which is Zachariah ben Akatsav says, I swear in the name of the temple that when they came to do the destruction of the temple, right, very relevant for the 9 days that we're in right now, my wife, nobody raped my wife, nothing happened. He was a Kohen. He wanted to say, my wife can stay married to me. To which the Mishnah said, Ein Adam Yid al Atzmo, is not believed to testify about himself, so this doesn't work. And then the Gemara had brought a braita that said that when this kind of thing happens, they can't live in the same house, but they could live in the same courtyard still. And then you just have to make sure there's always people around, etc. To which they answered, Abai asked, what about a divorcee? Now we're talking here about a divorcee who was married to a Kohen. They got divorced. The Kohen cannot bring her back again, right? They're not allowed to remarry because she's now a divorcee. So do we say this was just a law for Shvuya, for one taken into captivity, but when it comes to a divorcee, we won't say the same thing? Or is it the same thing? To which the Gemara brings a braita, bottom of Kaf Zayin, I'm a bet right now, Tashma Tanya, as it says in a braita. If someone divorces a woman, this is a regular Yisrael, and then she gets remarried, she can't get remarried in his shchuna. Shchuna usually means neighborhood. Here, many of the commentaries think that we're talking about a very, very small neighborhood, because we're going to compare it now to a mavoy, which is an alleyway. In those days, they had a few houses that would open into a courtyard. And then there would be a few courtyards that would open up into an alley. Those who learn Eruvin will remember from Eruvin. In a minute, we're going to have a case of a mavoi. Most people think that a shchuna is even smaller than a mavoi, even though we normally think of a neighborhood as a bigger area. And the truth is, some of the commentaries explain it that way, but it makes more sense to say it's a smaller area. So here, if we have a woman who's married to a Yisrael, she gets remarried. At that point, she's never allowed to go back to him. They can't live anymore in the same neighborhood. Again, right? Hard for us to understand as a real neighborhood because this often happens. But again, many of the commentaries think this is a very small area. They can't live in the same area because we don't want them to be near each other and want to end up getting back together again. If he was a Kohen, she can't, and this is why it seems the mavoi is a little bigger than a shchuna. They can't be in the same shchuna. If it's a Kohen, she can't live in the mavoi with him. Okay? Now, why is this mavoi bigger? Because in this case, she's not even getting married to anybody else. Even if she's not married, she can't be in the same mavoi with him. What's the issue here? Well, a Kohen can't bring back his wife once they got divorced. So what do you see from here, by the way? They can't live, right, in the same alleyway. Okay, and of course not in the same courtyard. Okay, so when it's a Yisrael, they can't live in the same shchuna, but they could live in the same alleyway. With a Kohen, we have to be more strict and not even allow within the alleyway. If it was a small village, said there was a case. They treat it like a shchuna. Some people say they treat it like a mavoi. There's different girsaot here, different versions. Anyway, a small neighbor, right? A small village is considered like one of these. Okay, let's debate a little bit about which one. Now comes the big question, and this is right. This whole thing is actually pretty interesting in terms of relevance, in terms of divorce couples, and can they live, right? And what distance can they live from each other? But now the Gemara asks, well, someone has to move out. Which one's moving out? Tashma, let's learn from here. Tanya, it says in a braita, she has to leave from him. Okay, he doesn't get kicked out, she gets kicked out. But if she owned the courtyard, then he has to leave. It's hers. Okay, I guess the assumption is it was his, right? Usually the land is owned by the man. That's why she has to leave. She was the owner, though, he would have to leave. Here comes the classic question. What if they jointly own the courtyard, right? Which now is very, very common, right? When you get divorced, you both own the property. So tashma, right? In those days, it was less common. But in any case, they ask the question. Tashma, well, it says in the source, she's pushed off from him. What do you think the case is? If it's his courtyard, pshita, you wouldn't need to say it. Obviously, if he owns the land, she has to leave. Well, if it's her property, for sure she doesn't have to leave. It says in a Braita. He gets pushed off from her. It must be that they both owned it jointly. So to which, and then what do you see? She gets pushed off. To which the Gemara rejects and says, what do you mean? Maybe they both rented property there in the same courtyard, and therefore it wouldn't teach you if they both jointly own. Only if they both jointly rent, then she gets pushed off. To which the Gemara asks, okay, well then my Havel, so who leaves? Who has to leave? Tashma, let's learn from here. The pasuk says, pasuk in, I believe it's Yeshayahu. Yeah, Yeshayahu Kafbet. It says, Hinei Hashem metaltelecha tiltela gever. God is going to throw you like throw you away, like the way a man gets thrown away. V'amarav tiltule de gavra kashimi deitata. A man getting displaced is much more difficult than a woman. That's why it's called a tiltela gever. It's much more difficult. Now we're going to understand finally why it's so obvious to them the woman leaves and not the man, because a man leaving his place, getting thrown into a new place is much more difficult than for a woman, and therefore it must be the man who has to leave, the man who stays, and the woman who has to leave. Whether one agrees with this or not is a good question. On what basis they say this, I don't really know. Tanu Rabbanan. Lavai menu. We're now going to have other things that go on between divorced couples that people should try to avoid. Lavai menu if he had borrowed money when they were still married from her father's property, or father's, let's say she inherited, when he goes to pay it back, he has to use an intermediary. Shouldn't be involved together with her. If they come to in judgment together, we don't pay any attention to them. We won't judge their case. Rav Papa Amal, we should put them in excommunication if they come together, right? They come to court instead of sending messengers or something. And Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua Amar Nigude Nami Menagdin. Sounds very harsh, okay? But he says we give them lashes. Okay? They basically want to avoid them from being together. Okay. Now the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman Tana Ba'avel Rabati, quotes from Avel Rabati. It's one of these small masechtot. When is this said though? Only if it's divorced from marriage. We learned when they're engaged, betrothed, halacha betrothal, you need a divorce as well. If he divorces her from the erusin, nifrat al yedei atzma, she'en libo gaspa, then she can actually come collect the money herself, because there's not as strong a desire between them, because they were never together. And comes the Gemara and says, there was a case of an engaged couple, they got divorced. They went before Rava. He was also there as well. Rava put up a messenger in between them to make sure they weren't interacting. He said, Rav Ada bar Matna comes and says to Rava, but doesn't it say in Avel Rabati? It's only when it's from marriage, not from engagement. To which Rava answers, I saw the way they were looking at each other. They clearly had a very strong connection. Because of that, I insisted, even though they were only engaged. Amrle, Ika de Amre. Some people had a different version of the story. It's the same idea, but a little bit different. Who said what? Lo eke Rava shliach b'tayu. Rava didn't put up a messenger in between them. Amrle Rav Ada bar Matna nikumar shlicha b'tayu. Rav Ada says to him, in this case, it wasn't Rav Ada questioned him, why did you put a shaliach? Here he questioned him, why didn't you put a shaliach? Amarle, Amar Rav Nachman. He said to him, because Rav Nachman said, Tana ba'avel Rabati. V'chulei, but it says there, only from Nisuin, not from Erusin. Amar lei, hanimile, echadelo gai sebadade. Rava answers him, that's only when they don't have a strong, Rav Ada says to Rava, but that's only when they don't have a strong connection between them. But these people, I can see they have a very strong connection, and therefore I think you need to put a shaliach in between. So the same idea comes out either which way you have the story. It's just a matter of who said what and who did what and what either which way Rava did something, Rav Ada questioned him, and then the question is who has the last, right? Either which way the last word is, it really depends on the situation and their relationship. New Mishnah. Now we're going to talk more about who's believed about what and in what situation. We're going to specifically talk about a child who gets older. And when they get older, they testify about something they remembered when they were a child. So the question is, children generally, their testimony isn't accepted. So here you have an older person whose testimony is accepted, but they're talking about something that happened when they were a child. So it's going to depend on what it's for. So these people can speak when they're older about what they saw when they were younger. Okay, he could say, I recognize signatures, right? We talked about verifying signatures. You need two witnesses. In this case, one of them can be the son saying, I recognize my fathers, I recognize my rabbis, I recognize my brothers from when I was younger. We discussed the situation where they don't have the ketubah anymore and they don't remember was she a virgin or not. So we can say, I remember I was at the wedding, I was a kid at the time, but I remember she went out with her veil and her hair was all loose, and that was a sign of a virgin. That she was a virgin when she got married, and therefore she got a ketubah of 200 zuz. Now, in this case, we're going to allow, okay, we're going to talk about the difference between these cases as we go through the Gemara. Which cases, right? On what basis are we allowing this subpart testimony? Why in these situations it is allowed and why not in the others? So we'll talk about this as we get to the Gemara. I remember this kid, he used to come out of school and he would go, they would dunk him in the mikveh to eat truma, and that would allow him now to eat truma. And he would be on the line with us to collect money to collect the truma at the granary. So he must be a Kohen. This area is an area where there was a grave. There were bodies buried underneath, and therefore there's a concern. Anywhere you walk in this field, you might be stepping on bones and you'll be impure. But it's also saying, I remember the Beit HaPras was here and it wasn't over there. So that area people can walk on. And this is where the Tchum Shabbat used to, right? Well, we used to walk here and this is where we would stop. But you're not allowed to say, yes, I know this is your field, or your property, but I remember that someone used to always walk through here, that he had rights to walk through. So now he has rights to this part of your field or your property. Or you can't say that this person used to do a ma'amadu misped. They would stop on the way home for the funeral and they would cry for the person and do extra hespedim on the way home. I remember this person would use your land to do that, meaning, again, he had rights to your land. So that's not allowed, and that's because we're going to see in the Gemara, these are monetary issues. You're basically taking away somebody's property from them that you're not allowed to use subpar testimony for. A lot of these cases, not all of them, but need two witnesses, in which case the second witness has to be someone who testifies perfectly, like have a perfect testimony that they're testifying as a gadol about something they knew when they were a gadol, when they were older, and not from when they were younger. So you can have this person who remembers something when he was younger, as long as he testifies together with someone who's older. That's only for the issues that require two people, like the truma, for example, only is one person. But some of the other things, like verifying the documentation, would be two witnesses. Okay. Utsricha. Why do you need for him to say, the Mishnah to say, the signature of the father and the brother and the rabbi? Why do you need all three? Utsricha, you need all three. Right? So the father, he's always with his father, so he recognizes it very well. So we'll trust him. Aval Rabolo, but maybe not your rabbis. Rabo, and if you just had your rabbis, he's scared of his Rav, and maybe for that reason he's always paying particular attention to his signature. And the connection is not the most strongest connection. Why, if you're scared of the rabbi, will you recognize his signature better? But can make some connection. Aval Aviv lo, but he doesn't have that same fear of his father. So maybe he doesn't recognize his father's as well. If you have both of those, you'd say Aviv d'shchiach kabeh. They each have a particular reason why he might for sure know it. Aval achiv, but the brother, who neither of those hold true for, so maybe not. Kamash malan comes to teach you kevan de kiyum shtarot midirabanan hemnu rabanan midirabanan. Since the whole issue of verifying documentation is only of rabbinic nature, because without, if the rabbis hadn't come along and said it, you would have just had two people signed on a document who says you need to verify. Only because of people who forge documents, the rabbis insisted that we have it. Since they insisted we have this, it's only rabbinic, we can be more lenient. My time. If you remember, we said in the Mishnah, when you're taking money out of someone's hands, we don't allow this kind of testimony. But with the woman, we're letting the woman demand a higher ketubah based on your testimony. So why is this allowed? It's because we have a chazaka that most women get married as virgins, and therefore that helps strengthen his position, and therefore we allow it. It's really only Giloi Milta Ba'alma. He's just kind of revealing something that already happened, and it was kind of obvious that was the case. Now we're going to have a big question here. Maybe it's the slave of a Kohen, a Canaanite slave, because they also ate truma. To which the Gemara says, this supports the statement. You're not allowed to teach your Eved Knani Torah. And that's why they weren't in school. This was someone who got out of school where they were learning Torah, presumably. And that's why it couldn't have been an Eved. So the Gemara asks, really? Velo? Vahatanya, doesn't it say in a Braita, Lavai Menu Rabo, which is a bit of a strange scenario. But if the Eved, if the master borrowed money from his slave, or Osha Asao Rabo Apitropos, moving now to Amabet, or he put the Eved in charge of his property, or he put tefillin on in front of his owner, or he read 3 verses in the shul. Don't think that these are all signs that he was freed by his master. No, even an Eved can do these things, and it's not a sign that he's a free man. So what do you see here? He was reading psukim in the shul, which sounds like he must be learning Torah. Not exactly the same thing. That's what the Gemara is going to say in a minute. Hatam de ikli Eved midato. There, the Eved was reading the psukim on his own. Kika amrina, but what we said is the kanai be minag banim. We were saying he didn't go to school like all the other children went. The rabbi, the master can't teach him Torah. Can't go to school, and that's why whoever went to school was for sure a Kohen. But if he read some psukim in the shul, that he does on his own, that he could do. Litbol echo b'truma. Now they say this allows you what? B'truma de Rabbanan. Allows you to eat truma on a rabbinic level. That's what we're talking about, truma de Rabbanan, and that's why, again, why do we allow this subpart testimony? Like we said before with the Kiyum Shtaret. It's all rabbinic. Because it's rabbinic, we allow it. Now we're going to have the same question as we had before. But maybe it's the slave. Maybe the slave was waiting online, right? Remember, the slave of a Kohen gets to eat truma and also could be collecting truma for his household, right? For his master. To which they say, and this reminds us of an entire sugya we saw we're going to have a repeat of a sugya we saw in Yevamot. This Mishnah holds by the position that says slaves cannot collect at the granary. Okay, now we're going to talk about this entire debate. Tanya, as it says in a Braita, Ein chokim truma le'eved elen ken rabo imo, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yossi omer yacholu sheyomar, im kohen ani tnu li b'shvil atzmi, im eved kohen ani tnu li b'shvil b'ni. Rabbi Yossi says, of course an eved can collect, because right, Rabbi Yehuda says slaves can't collect. Rabbi Yossi says, of course they can collect. Either they can say, if I'm a kohen, I can collect as a kohen. If I'm that's not that, right? Anyone can stand, like you can stand on line if you're a kohen because you're a kohen, or if you're an eved of a kohen. So you can say, well, bring me because of my master. Bimkomo shel Rabbi Yehuda. Now, because they had these different opinions about whether an eved could collect or not, Bimkomo shel Rabbi Yehuda, where they didn't allow slaves, anyone who was on the line at the granary could get married as a kohen because obviously they're a kohen, otherwise they wouldn't be on the line at the granary. But b'mkomo shel Rabbi Yossi, who allowed slaves to collect, since slaves were on the line, so just because they saw you on the line for the truma, that wouldn't allow you to marry because maybe you were an eved. And that's why, again, our Mishnah that says somebody testified that you were on the line would have to be holding like Rabbi Yossi, who basically says, like Rabbi Yehuda, who basically says we don't allow slaves to be collecting. And that's why if someone saw you collecting, it must be you're a kohen. Tanya, now we're going to have a braita about this, which also we saw in Yevamot. Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi, mi'amai lo hi'adati. I never testified about anyone being a kohen or not. Pam achad hi'adati, but one time I did. Ve'elu eved l'kuhan al pi, and they had an eved get married. And as I testified about a slave that he was a kohen, and they married him off to a Jewish woman based on my testimony. Oy vavoy, what a mistake I made. So the Gemara says, no way that they allowed this, that this happened, because when it comes to the animals of tzaddikim, God doesn't let any sort of anything go wrong there. What is he what's this talking about? The donkey of Pinchas ben Yair was known that he wouldn't eat. They put food in front of him and he wouldn't eat it, and it turned out it was demai. It was produce that was a suffix about whether Trumot or Maslo were taken, and he wouldn't eat it. So God makes sure that mistakes don't happen even to animals of tzaddikim. So tzaddikim atzmam l'koshkin. Of course, then this mistake won't happen, right? There's no way a tzaddik, this Rabbi Lezer or Rabbi Yossi, caused a kohen, an eved, to get married, thinking he was a kohen. So the Gemara fixes it and says, well, what they really meant was ela bikshu lahalot eved l'kuhan al pi. They just wanted to, right? They were going to. I testified about him. They thought he was a kohen, and then they realized. So then they realized, Chaza ba'atre Rabbi Yossi. I saw him in the town of Rabbi Yossi at the granary, and I remember Rabbi Yossi allowed both, but right, he allowed the avadim to collect. The Azal v'asi v'atre to Rabbi Yehuda. But what happened? I testified the place of Rabbi Yehuda, and because in the place of Rabbi Yehuda they don't allow people who are not Kohanim. So they thought, right? And as I said, I saw him at the granary, but I was testifying the place of Rabbi Yehuda where that counts as testimony, but I saw it in the place of Rabbi Yossi where that doesn't count for testimony. So therefore, there was a little confusion, but at the end they figured out and they realized that I had seen in a different place and that the laws were different there. And therefore, in the end, I was saved, right? I didn't make this mistake, but I almost did. Moving on in the Mishnah now, Shamakom ze beit, right, in quoting from the Mishnah, Shamakom ze beit hapras, my timer, beit hapras de Rabbanan. Beit hapras is only rabbinic. To Amar of Yudam or Shmuel, Minapeach Adam beit hapras v'olech. Right, there's a concern that there's bones there, but what happened? The field was plowed, so we don't know where the bones are and how big they are. So what do? Assumption is since it was plowed, the bones are at the top, so you blow as you're walking, and then you can walk because you're assuming you're pushing the bones all aside and you won't walk over them and, right, touch them, right, come in contact with them as you're walking. Another way you can do it is if a lot of people walked in that field, you can assume the bones are crushed up to very small pieces. My timer, and then it's okay. My timer, the size of a bone that is impure is a size of a barley bean. And there's an assumption if a lot of people walked in that field, that all the bones were crushed up already into smaller than size of a barley, and in which case there's no tumah there anymore. Why can you testify about Tchum Shabbat in this way, right? When again, you're remembering from when you were younger. We've seen this many times, especially in Eruvin. There's a machloket, is Tchumin de Rabbanan or Doraita. So the author of our Mishnah must hold that it's rabbinic, and that's why we can accept this subpart testimony. We don't allow money to change hands based on this kind of testimony. Tanu Rabbanan, we're going to have a braita now. Tinok here means a young child, not necessarily a baby. Okay, a child is believed to say, it could be anyone under the age of 13 or 12. My father told me when I was younger, this family is impure, this family is pure. To which the Gemara says, what are you talking about? What does it mean, a pure family, impure family? This family is good family, has good, good lineage, and this one is not. The assumption is that we're talking here about a case where somebody questioned the lineage of a family, and then within that, he said, I know these are okay and these people are not okay. That we ate in the ktsatsa of this woman to this man. We don't know what ktsatsa is. Only on the very last line of the Gemara today will we learn. So we'll leave that aside for right now. So I remember my father would send me to give the challah and the gifts to the Kohen, right? The parts of the animal that are supposed to go to the Kohen. And whenever you slaughter an animal, certain parts, the zroa l'chaim and keva, arm, the cheeks, and one of the insides, the stomachs, go to the Kohen. I remember I used to deliver it to them. Okay. To which the Gemara says, al yidei, v'lo al yidei achel. Okay. Only himself, but not if you remember somebody else brought it to these people. And then again, that means these people are Kohanim. V'kulan, in all these cases we discussed, we talked before about a katan, right, who became a gadol. But if he was Gentile and then converted, or he was a slave and then was freed, became Jewish, we don't allow him to testify about what happened when he was a non-Jew or an Eved. Now, last line. And just like our Mishnah, you can't say, I know this person, I remember this person used to always walk through your path, your field, that was his path, or he used it for the ma'amad and the misped from the funerals. And then Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer Ne'emanim, he says they are believed. So now they say, who is Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka referring to? Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Ahaya, to what? Ilema Seifa, if he was talking about the last case we just said about the misped and the ma'amad and the path in someone's house, Afuke Mamono, that's to take money out. How could we allow that? Ela Aresha, must be about this line. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer Ne'emanim, he believes the Gentile and he believes the Eved. B'mai kamiflige, what's the root of their debate? Since he was Gentile, he wasn't careful about paying attention to these things. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka savar very interesting line. He says, look, because he was planning to convert, he already was very careful about things and was paying attention to all these things. And yes, we can accept his testimony. Mike Tzatza. Now we're left with understanding what this Tzatza is, and with that we'll finish our daf. Titanu Rabbanan Ketzad Tzatza. If you have one of these family, one of the brothers married a woman who was not appropriate, like for example, a mamzeret. So, ba'im b'nei mishpacha, there was a custom they would do in order that everyone would know, and they would, in doing this, they would protect themselves. People wouldn't suspect them of being the one who married the mamzeret, and they all know that the child, right, the children of this couple are going to be mamzerim. Ba'im b'nei mishpacha u'mevi'im chavit melea perot. They bring a barrel full of fruits. V'shovrin ota be'emtza rechava. They open it, they break it in the middle of the street. You can see that makes a whole big to-do. V'omrim, and they say, Achenu beit Yisrael shemum, our brothers Israelites, listen. Achinu ploni nasa isha she'eno genet lo. Our brother so-and-so married a woman that's not appropriate, though, right? It's not appropriate. She's one of the people you can't marry. Umitira'im anu shemi yitarev zaro b'zareinu. And we're worried that his lineage will mix in with ours and people will think ours is messed up. Bo k'chu lachem dugma l'dorot, uses an example for future generations. Shelo yitarev zaro b'zareinu. So everyone knows that their children won't marry into our family. V'zoi ktzatzah shatinot ne'eman la'ir aleh. This young child, this kid, when he's older, says, I remember as a child, they opened up, they broke this barrel of fruit, and they did this ktzatzah in order to tell everybody, then he can testify about this family that they have the mamzerim, and I guess about the other families that it's not within their family. Ktzatzah, by the way, the language there's all different drashot about what exactly it means here, but it often means kates, end, right? Like to kind of cut the family off from the rest of the other families. And with that, Hadran Armala. Tomorrow we start the third chapter of Masechet Ketubot. Have a great day, everybody.